The story begins in 1998 in the busy center of New York City. Lincoln Rhyme, a top forensic expert, is called to a crime scene under a dimly lit tunnel to investigate a recent murder. As he approaches the scene, a heavy piece of concrete suddenly falls on him, causing severe injuries. When Lincoln wakes back up, he finds himself in a hospital bed, completely paralyzed from the accident. The focus then shifts to a married couple, Alan and Lindsay Rubin, who have just landed in New York. They get into a taxi, exhausted and ready to rest. As the cab starts moving, both of them fall asleep. Lindsay wakes up suddenly, sensing something is wrong. Growing worried, she tries to speak to the driver, but he remains silent and ignores her. Lindsay wakes Alan, and they both beg the driver to stop, but he continues driving with the doors locked. Meanwhile, Lincoln Rhyme regains consciousness in his apartment, where Thelma, his caring nurse, is by his side. She offers to get him some juice. Richard Thompson, the medical technician in charge of his life support equipment, stops by for a casual chat before leaving. Shortly after, Dr. Barry Lehman, Lincoln's close friend, visits. Lincoln confides in Barry about his decision to end his life, fearing a seizure might leave him in a vegetative state. Lincoln insists he will go through with his plan, with or without Barry's support, and Barry reluctantly agrees to help him. We are then introduced to Amelia Donaghy, a police officer getting ready for her day alongside her boyfriend Steve. Steve wants to take their relationship to the next level, but Amelia, though she cares about him, isn't ready for that kind of commitment. Later, while having breakfast with fellow officers, Amelia mentions she plans to transfer to youth services. Her plans are interrupted by a call reporting a frightened child at a nearby site. When Amelia arrives, the child leaves her to a gruesome discovery: a murder victim with a severed finger. Amelia spots some clues on a nearby rail track and quickly signals an approaching train to stop, saving the evidence from being destroyed. She then instructs the boy to fetch supplies while she documents the crime scene with photographs. We then return to Lindsay, who is still alive but now trapped in a steam junction tunnel, tied up by the masked taxi driver who abducted her. Elsewhere, the police arrive at the crime scene to find that Alan Rubin has been brutally murdered. One of the officers, Polly, tries to show the evidence they've collected to Lincoln Rhyme, but Rhyme suddenly suffers a severe attack. Thelma quickly intervenes, stabilizing Rhyme and ushering Polly out of the room. Once Lincoln has recovered, he focuses on the evidence Polly left behind. He asks Thelma to load the photographs into a viewer so he can examine them closely. As he studies the clues, Lincoln deciphers a series of numbers written on the evidence. Amelia arrives at his home in response to his request to see her. Rhyme praises her for her quick thinking and instincts at the crime scene, noting her natural talent for forensic work. After analyzing the situation, Lincoln concludes that the crime scene was deliberately staged. He shares a grim prediction. Based on the evidence, Lindsay is still alive but will be killed by 4 p.m. unless they act quickly. The numbers 119, 119 serve as a chilling countdown.
Ollie, I'm convinced that this crime scene was staged.
Lincoln urges Amelia to join the forensic team working on the case, and although she hesitates, Amelia ultimately agrees. The investigation intensifies as Lincoln sets up a command center in his home. The team works tirelessly, piercing together clues and following the trail left behind by the mysterious bone collector serial killer. Lincoln's keen intellect allows him to trace Lindsay's possible location through a series of clues and scraps of paper found at the crime scene. The police, along with Amelia, race to the site, but they arrive too late. Lindsay has been tragically scalded to death by an open steam pipe. Despite the horrific scene, Lincoln instructs Amelia to collect any remaining evidence, including Lindsay's severed bone and another scrap of paper. However, when Rhyme orders Amelia to saw off Lindsay's hands to retrieve the handcuffs for fingerprint analysis, Amelia is horrified and refuses, storming away from the scene in anger. Late that night, night, Amelia returns home, deeply shaken by the day's events. As Amelia sets in for the night, she is startled by a noise at her door. Grabbing her gun, she cautiously investigates and finds her friend Solomon, who was trying to enter through a window. He informs her that Rhyme has been urgently trying to reach her and needs her to come back to his place. The scene shifts to a young man leaving a bar and entering a taxi, the same taxi driven by the serial killer. Back in Lincoln's home, Amelia arrives to find Rhyme waiting for her. He warmly welcomes her back and gently addresses painful memories of her father's death, encouraging her not to judge herself by past events. Rhyme emphasizes that she has the markings of an exceptional detective and shouldn't waste her talents by quitting. Their conversation is interrupted by Solomon, who informs them of an NYU student who was abducted by a taxi driver, with the student's girlfriend reporting the incident. In the meantime, the taxi driver leads his latest victim to a slaughterhouse, where he binds the young man to a pole and begins a horrifying ritual, using a knife to carve into the victim's body and removing a bone. The victim's blood attracts a swarm of rats, which begin to feast on him. Meanwhile, Rhyme, despite Thelma's concerns about his dangerously high blood pressure, pushes himself to decode the clues and pinpoint the victim's location. When the team arrives at the slaughterhouse, they find the victim already dead, his body ravaged by rats. Amelia, shaken but determined, fires a shot to scare the rats away and proceeds to search for any remaining evidence. The investigation takes a sudden turn when Police Captain Howard Chaney, frustrated by being kept out of the loop, arrives at the scene. He announces that Rhyme is no longer in charge of the case and orders the detectives to vacate Rhyme's home. At the station, Chaney instructs a detective to search for fingerprints on the evidence, leading them to finally identify the killer and obtain his taxi license. When they arrive, they uncover a horrific scene: a dead body lying underneath the taxi, with the victim's finger bones gruesomely chopped off. Meanwhile, Amelia, determined to find answers, sneaks into Chaney's office and takes some critical evidence. She then hurries to Rhyme's home, where she surprises him with her unexpected visit. Without wasting time, she shows Rhyme the third piece of paper clue that she found at the crime scene. As they examine it together, Thelma, Rhyme's dedicated nurse, arrives with a file sent by Eddie Ortiz. The message reveals that the same type of homicide cases have occurred over the last 12 months. After analyzing the information, Rhyme deduces that the killer was involved in all 4 of the supposed homicide cases. Suddenly, Rhyme suffers a seizure, and Amelia, panicking, quickly alerts Thelma to help. Thelma springs into action, trying to stabilize Rhyme until he regains some semblance of control. Concerned, Amelia asks if Rhyme will be alright. Thelma, with a heavy heart, explains that even if he survives, Rhyme won't be truly happy. The tension in the room thickens as Chaney arrives at the Rhyme's house, determined to see him. However, Thelma stands her ground, refusing to let Chaney in, claiming that Rhyme is asleep. Frustrated, Chaney warns her that he will return with a warrant, leaving Thelma worried about what might happen next. Elsewhere, an elderly man and his granddaughter prepare to enter a taxi. The scene quickly shifts as a police detective, sensing something suspicious, begins to follow the vehicle. He pulls the taxi over, intending to question the driver. The driver suddenly pulls him closer, shoots him point blank, and speeds off. Back at Rhyme's home, Amelia gently tries to wake him. To her surprise, he suddenly starts talking, startling her. They share a brief but significant conversation, during which Thelma, who had been resting, wakes up to find Rhyme fully alert and engaged. The moment of calm is interrupted by a phone call from Polly, another detective, who informs Rhyme about the recent shooting of a taxi inspector by a driver with an older man and a young girl in his cab. Rhyme immediately suspects that the taxi driver is the killer they've been hunting. Rhyme then directs Amelia to examine the third piece of paper on the viewer screen. As they scrutinize the details, Thelma joins in, and together, they deduce that the scraps of paper form the image of a woman's face. Rhyme recognizes the image as an old publisher's book logo, something he he once owned. He concludes that the killer is pointing them toward an old crime book, a chilling hint at what might come next. Amelia rushes to the library, where a man who seems to be Richard, a familiar face from earlier, helps her locate the book she needs. After searching, she finally finds a book titled The Bone Collector. A terrifying realization dawns on her. The killer is reenacting the crimes detailed in this book. This discovery gives them a crucial clue about where the next victims might be found. The police quickly mobilize and head to the identified location. Amelia, following her instincts, arrives first and finds the victims. She desperately tries to save them as backup arrives, but despite their best efforts, the elderly man succumbs to his injuries. Thankfully, the young girl is successfully resuscitated, providing a small glimmer of hope amid their stress. At the scene, Amelia discovers another bone, left behind as a clue, leading her to conclude that Rhyme is the killer's next target. Thelma, unaware of the impending danger, opens the door, only to be brutally stabbed by the killer. Cheney is also found dead shortly after. Rhyme, sensing something is wrong, calls out for Thelma as he hears movement in the house, but receives no response. To his shock, Richard, the seemingly helpful medical technician, steps out of the shadows and reveals himself as the killer.
Investigation. It was a witch hunt.
Richard, whose true identity is Marcus Andrews, confronts Rhyme with a dark and twisted motivation. Years ago, Rhyme had written a damning report accusing Marcus of planting evidence, which led to the wrongful imprisonment of 6 innocent people, one of whom tragically took their own life. Marcus's life was shattered, and he spent 6 years in jail, unable to defend himself. Now he's back for revenge, blaming Rhyme for all the lives lost due to the clues he deliberately left behind. Knowing that Rhyme and Amelia would be able to fail to save the victims in time. In a climactic confrontation, Marcus attempts to kill Rhyme, but Rhyme fights back with everything he has, using his medical bed to crush Marcus's hand. Enraged, Marcus pushes Rhyme off the bed and prepares to deliver the final blow with a knife. Just as Marcus leans in to hear Rhyme's whispered words, Rhyme bites down on his neck, causing Marcus to bleed profusely. As Marcus readies himself to finish the job, Amelia bursts in and shoots Marcus from behind, saving Rhyme's life at the last possible moment. The nightmare finally ends, with Rhyme deciding to abandon his plan to end his life. The film comes to a close on a bittersweet note, as Rhyme is surrounded by his family and friends on Christmas Day, offering a sense of peace and closure to his life. The end. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.